Hello, my name is Sheldon Idle, and I'm a representative from the Galactic Federation, and I want to say not only that, but good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be, since this program and also the time you'll be seeing this videotape will be on at different times of the day. What I'm here to talk to you about is a very important series of messages that have come from the Galactic Federation and the spiritual hierarchy. These particular messages deal with a bunch of subjects, so what I'm going to do is go through these subjects one by one, and hopefully by the end of this hour you will be much more educated about what is about to happen to everybody on this planet. First of all, let me start out for those who may not know what we're talking about from the beginning and explain some things. First of all, what we're talking about in calling the Galactic Federation is a federation of various galactic civilizations from various planets and star systems throughout this Milky Way galaxy. They have come to this planet and have basically been observing this planet and this star system from really the beginning of our present civilization. But they have come since the end of World War II and have observed our slow, might call it now, rapid emergence into a near-destructive mode of our civilization. This particular reality has caused them now to make a basic decision. This decision was to make a divine intervention into our civilization. The time for this will come very shortly. So what I would like to do is also talk to you about the spiritual hierarchy, which is the key element in this whole procedure anyways. The spiritual hierarchy are basically the angelics. They are basically the Elohim, or the creators. They are also the so-called, as I like to call them, time lords. These are special time angels that deal with the nature of how the divine plan is brought forth in different dimensions and different realities. Now, what has been happening over the past basically half decade, since roughly about 1992 to the present year of 1997, is that we have slowly been moving toward rapid changes in our planetary future. This future could either have been catastrophic, as there was great potential for it in the early part of this decade, or it could have been something else. The something else that we were talking about was a mass landing to happen before all the things that we're about to talk about would have occurred. However, due to certain things that happened beyond the control of the Galactic Federation and ourselves, it didn't happen in the way that I originally and other people had also hoped for. But it is very, very close right now to happening. So let us talk about what is going to happen. First and foremost, let's talk about the Earth changes. Now, what has been happening to our planet over the last roughly 3 decades to 3.5 decades is that our planet has been changing rapidly. Not rapidly in terms of what we, in terms of our limited lifestyle, might call a quick change, but in terms of geologic time, this has been incredibly swift. What happened first was that in 1972, our planet was in the midst of an almost incredible disaster, namely our sun almost novaed in the summer of 1972. This was stopped by the Syrians and by their friends from the spiritual hierarchy, the various local councils of both the Time Lords and the Elohim. Now let's talk about what they did so we can then go forward. Because what I want to do with this tape is give a basic overview of some of the stuff you may have heard from me before, but what I also want to do is give you a chance to see some of the new stuff that has happened in the last year. So let's begin with a basic, quick overview, and then we'll get into the new material. Because I think it's important from all that they are telling me that all the people on this planet know what is happening. So let's begin with the whole process of what happened with the sun. The sun had a problem with its core, and as I said, it almost novaed. Because of the ability to change time, which is what the Time Lords are all about, they were able to produce and put a very important multidimensional holographic shield around our sun. This then allowed the sun to not nova, but to be corrected over a gradual period of time. The second thing that they did, which was roughly 20 years later, was they started putting a huge holograph around our Earth. Once this was done, it then allowed both the sun to be in a whole new reality, A, and it also allowed our planet to be in its own new reality, which is B. So basically, our entire solar system was in a whole new reality, not just our sun and our particular planet, but most importantly, we are now going to talk about the planet and the star. Now, let's talk about the planet, first of all. In 1972, what began happening was because of the change in the whole procedure of what was happening on our planet, this was due to what was happening with the sun. Now, if we had diagrams, I could do all these fancy stuff, but I'm not going to be doing that right now. So just imagine that suddenly the waves coming from us, from the sun, were of an entirely different reality. We couldn't make it out from most of what our limited science could do at this time to see the change, but even they began seeing this change but didn't talk about it to other people. So what happened was we were suddenly encased in a whole new light energy envelope. Not only the hologram, but the energy coming from the sun, which we normally interact to. Now, as our sun changed and our Earth began to change accordingly, what happened? One, slowly the atmosphere of our planet began to change. How did it change? The first thing that changed, and this was not noticed by our own atmospheric scientists till the early 90s, was that the upper atmosphere began to break up. It began to create a whole new reality up there. This created jet streams of up to 200 to 400 miles an hour and 500 miles and 600 miles an hour. These were considered highly unusual. Now, what also began to happen was, deep down within the core of the Earth, gradual periodic upwellings of magma began to happen. This led to the rise of a whole new phenomenon which we began to call the El Nino effect. So what happened was, over the last 25 years, our oceans have begun to change, our atmosphere has begun to change. Now, when you change the atmosphere and you change the water, it also means the whole process of the land, the lithosphere, also has to change. So what began happening was, we began from roughly the period of the early 80s up to now to seeing a gradual increase in the amount of earthquakes. Now, as the amount of earthquakes began to increase, it also meant that pressure was being put upon the surface of our planet, because it meant that the various tectonic plates were rubbing against each other, either subducting underwards or doing the other particular processes in an entirely different and more drastic way. Now, as this began to happen, it meant that something had to happen to our planet. This was the major difficulty that they began to see. So they began warning people about this. Now, one of the major things that causes a major change, besides all this stuff going on around us, is pollution, whether it's radioactive pollution, industrial pollution, pollution from cars, etc. What has happened is we were accelerating the whole procedure. So suddenly, by the early 90s, our particular planet was now in a massive difficulty. So what happened? The local spiritual hierarchy did not want a massive disaster. They were afraid of it. They were warning people about it, but basically they were afraid of it. So what happened? The hierarchy asked the Time Lords, they asked the Elohim to slow down the whole procedure and to do something else. And this has to do with the whole nature of what has been happening to Earth's humanity over the last 25 years. So let's talk about ourselves, Earth humans. Now, what has been happening to us gradually over the last 25 years is that we have been going through a whole change. First of all, a massive change in our genetics. It began very, very slowly. What we are talking about is a movement from the traditional two-strand DNA to what's called multi-stranding DNA. Eventually, when we become fully conscious again, we will be back into the complete 12-strand, the so-called star tetrahedron form of DNA, which is what all fully conscious humans have. Now, this effect began to be noticed in a much larger scale worldwide starting in the mid-1980s. So we were genetically mutating. Now, what are the side effects of this genetic mutating? One of the major effects of this is fatigue. So many times you may notice you've gone through very long fatigue cycles. The other thing that happens are all kinds of strange body ailments. These body ailments, aches, pains, you cannot affect, deep colds, etc., that really you can't understand. These particular things are, again, a byproduct of this whole procedure. So what you are having right now is you are mutating both physically with your genes and also in other ways. Your chakra system is also changing. What the chakra systems mean, Chakra simply means circle or wheel in Hindi or Sanskrit. What was happening was the 7 system was changing over to a system that has basically 11 chakras in the body from the 7, and then 2 in the top. So some people say you have 12 chakras or 13. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you just understand that your subtle body fields were also changing. So what was happening to us was that were becoming more conscious. What is the byproduct of being conscious? You suddenly become more spiritual. Metaphysics and other aspects of consciousness, such as Eastern religions, etc., any aspect to expand yourself in any way, suddenly became much more important to the whole procedure. So as we moved more and more and more and more into this, we began to see this effect. So what has happened now? For the last 4 years, as an example, when people have done various surveys of people after they've seen movies, what has been the 2 most important things that people have wanted to see? Spiritual things and UFOs. Why is that? Well, let's get back into the Galactic Federation itself. I'm not going to talk about the governments and the Greys and all that stuff, because people have heard that all over the place before. What I want to do right now is I want to talk basically about the Federation. What is the Galactic Federation, and what does it mean? What it means, first of all, is the Galactic Federation is a group of fully conscious humans and other sentient beings who are now working with our local hierarchies as well as the entire spiritual hierarchy for one purpose. This one purpose is to bring us safely into a new earth with a whole new consciousness, a full consciousness, to reunite us totally with our space brothers and sisters, to bring us into what we might call the galactic age. We might call this last half of the 20th century that we've been living on as a planetary age. Well, this next leap is the galactic one. So what are they all about? Now, of course, in the 1940s, we had the rise of the so-called nuclear weaponry. What nuclear weaponry meant for us, very basically, was that we suddenly put out a giant signal throughout the galaxy that we had reached levels that were now dangerous for ourselves as well as for others. Because what nuclear weaponry does is not only does it destroy life on this planet, it creates giant holes interdimensionally and it causes great difficulties for intergalactic beings. So this whole problem now became their problem. So the first thing that happened were a series of warnings. These warnings came concurrent with the so-called anti-bomb or ban the bomb movement of the 1950s. This was the first attempt to consciously attempt to bring forward a message and hope that it would change humanity. They unfortunately, as we know now, had very little effect, except for one thing. The angelics slowly but surely began putting pressure upon all the world's governments. This pressure was to do one thing, to bring forth a whole new reality. So we had the ecumenical movement of the Catholic Church and other movements of spirituality throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s. What this led to was the gradual moving away of the old concepts of government. We saw the breakdown in the late 80s of the Soviet Union and its huge series of captured or slave states in Eastern Europe. This was just the beginning. We must look upon the magic of what happened in Eastern Europe in the late 80s and early 90s as the beginning. Well, you might ask, the beginning of what? The beginning of a whole new reality. Our civilization, just as our planet was changing, just as we genetically and spiritually are changing, so is our civilization. We are moving away. But unfortunately, the way humanity works is in short little spurts. You go forward, you stay there for a while, you slide back a little bit, you go forward. This has been the way human civilization over the past 2 basic millennia has operated. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the few centuries left to do this wonderful evolutionary process that we could do on our own. So we need help. This is what the angelics realized. We needed to bring forth something to help us. So they began looking around, and they decided that the Federation was the only way to do it. Now, the Galactic Federation normally only contacts civilizations once they've done 3 basic things. First of all, they've pretty well united themselves. They're not little warring parties, etc. 2, they've proved that they have been able to get into space and in a way that is not primitive. And 3, they've changed their basic orientation from being one based upon war to one based upon peace. So we, of course, do not fit in these total 3 steps at all. So normally the Federation would just observe us, let us be, and whatever happened, happened. And if this planet, which it is a key part of the whole reality, they would just wait to see what happened. And if we annihilated ourselves, just reseed and put the planet into full consciousness and go forward. But this was not what they wanted to do. So what happened was they decided that they needed to have a divine intervention. Now what this divine intervention is about is simply 2 things. Helping us through midwifing us into our new civilization and helping us understand the rapid increase of our consciousness. Because we were moving from basically being a limited conscious being that operates in a world in which spirit is something else or something strange or dreadful or whatever, to one where we are totally united with the whole procedure. So what was needed for the most part was for a means to allow them to intervene in a way that would be part of this whole procedure. So one of the things that they had set up was to do a mass landing, to allow this whole procedure to happen. But one of the keys that hadn't been met, and which the angelics later decided was the key that was needed, was that a certain level of consciousness has to be reached. So this is what they have decided upon. We are approaching now that level of consciousness. So what they now want to do is, as the earth changes happen, and I'm going to be talking about that in a little bit, as the earth changes happen, what becomes necessary for us to understand is that this also leads to the rise of the first intervention on a formal way of the Federation with ourselves. Now, what basically is going to happen? Now, as I stated, starting in the early 70s, this planet began slowly and very gradually to change. We said the upper atmospheres changed, the El Nino effects in the oceans, and the increase in earthquakes. We're having an increase in volcanism in the last 5 years, especially. So what is happening now is the planet is putting out the signals that something great is about to happen. What is about to happen shortly, and I'm going to keep it at shortly because we're talking about geologic time, and even though it's rapid, and it could be even next week, it could be a month from now, whatever, but what we have to understand is we are close to it. But the close has to be kept ambiguous because there are factors involved which are right now unable for us to fully understand because we are limited conscious beings. But let's go over some scenarios here so that people have an idea of understanding what is about to happen. First and foremost, as we move forward in time, and this will happen, as I said, very shortly, first and foremost, there's going to be massive weather events, and we're already seeing the beginnings of so-called superstorms, super hurricanes, and really powerful tornadoes, etc. Now, as this moves forward, which will happen very rapidly, we're approaching a winter period in the northern hemisphere and a summer period in the southern hemisphere. Now, traditionally, in the northern hemisphere especially, this is a period of very severe weather, and it has already been forecast by most meteorologists that this will happen. But what will happen is not only the severe weather that we see, but more important than that, we will see superstorms coming together, combining. This will be the beginning of the whole procedure of earth changes. As the storm intensity increases, there will then be something happening simultaneously with that. This will be the rise of massive amounts of volcanism and earthquakes, because basically earthquakes and volcanism in areas where there are volcanoes go hand in hand. So this is going to be the first part. Now eventually it will reach a level where we get a disaster in an urban area that will be unable for the local government to in any way provide for successful evacuation. When this happens, then the Federation is fully and completely prepared to intervene, to evacuate people. Now, there are 2 basic scenarios for the evacuation, and I want to go over those so that people will have them. First point, what has been happening over the last basically 3 years is that the Federation has been moving itself to providing for permanent homes. Now, in a completely galactic human civilization, most of the civilization is below surface. Now, because it's below surface, if you were to see a fully conscious, pristine world, you would see very few, in a fully conscious civilization, you would see very few cities or anything approaching a city upon the area. There would only be in certain important nodes which are used for ceremony, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing of galactic human civilization. That's a whole series all by itself. But what we have to do right now is understand what is happening. These will be various interior, in other words, below the surface of the Earth, holographic environments, which will perfectly mirror the world we have right now. And all the creature comforts we could possibly want and have, including even those things that we consider dear to ourselves, will be there. So there's nothing to be afraid of about it. So those people that are to be evacuated first, some of them at least, will be brought into these areas. They'll be done so after a series of trainings are done. Now, for those that the areas are not ready for yet, they'll be basically brought up from the evacuation teams to the motherships, and they will stay there for up to a period of roughly 2 weeks before they are ready to go into their positions. After this first series of entire evacuations of specific areas, what is going to happen is the Federation, in their mind, will be pretty well known at that time. But what they suspect is that there's going to be a great deal of denial by a lot of people. They expect that governments and media, etc., will pretty well not cover this whole thing, or else be trying to demean the whole thing or trying to create some form of panic. So what they want to do next is to do a little experiment. Up to now on this planet, avatars or else fully conscious beings, godlike, Christ-like beings, which is what basically all are capable of being when we're fully conscious, have existed for just 1 here or 10 here in one area, and they've been mostly a very minute experience. What they want to do is do something worldwide where a large percentage, still very small, but much greater than ever known before on this planet, is suddenly put forth. They want to circle them with angelics so that they can feel the energies there. This will also be the beginning of what is known in the Bible as the second return of Christ, because Christ's return will be through the clouds. So that will be taken care of at the appropriate time in this experiment. This will be between the first set of evacuations and the second set of needed evacuations, and just before they are needed, there will be an entire bringing forth of a mass landing. So this is basically what the planet will have. And it's being done because the planet, mainly our human civilization, has to understand the nature of what is happening here. What is happening? What is happening is that our planet has to change, mainly our civilization has to change, because the planet has to change. Now, our planet for a long period of time has been what is called a limited conscious planet. And let me get into a little bit of the physics of that, but I don't want to get into too much of it, because if you do, then what happens is I tend to lose people, and I want it to be for the wide range of people. Basically what you have, if you were to look at a planet spinning through space, it has what's called an axis point. But the axis point isn't really anything more than a position. It's like a position for top. Actually, what the planet is hanging on are areas that roughly are about 19.5 degrees from the center point, from zero, up and down. These are really, you might look at them as the vectors. These are connected interdimensionally to where the planet's energies come from. The planet is then gliding. It's almost like a spaceship. It's then gliding. It's like a spaceship would be gliding or hovering. It's gliding along on this wave pattern of interdimensional energy. So this energy is there. Now, when a planet goes limited conscious, what happens is it's almost as if this huge, incredible wave pattern is cut from it. And suddenly, it needs what are called more physical 3D forces to operate on. So what happens is the planet switches from its traditional way of moving, which enlivens it, to an almost like deadening motion where it actually uses the fulcrum properly. Here I wish I had a ball and I could be spinning it, but I don't. So what I have to do is I'm just going to continue to hope that we have people who have a good imagination, and when I do what I'm doing, you'll understand it. My hope once is to give a lecture where I use animation and everything, and I can explain all of this stuff. But since I don't have that right now, I'm just going to try to explain it as best I can. So basically, the planet is moving from this interdimensional mode into this limited dimensional mode. It did this roughly around over 10 millennium ago when Atlantis went down. But we're not going to get into Atlantis and the limited conscious experiments and all that other stuff. What we have to concentrate on at this time is to mainly talk about what is happening to our planet right now. Our planet is now going to do a reverse of what we just talked about. It's going from a 3D reality back into its full conscious reality. How does it do this? First thing it has to do, it has to activate its core. And geologists a couple years ago finally found out that the core is acting like a giant crystal. So basically what is happening, we have the electricity at the core of the planet. It's acting like an armature, and it's producing energy, magnetic energy of a high note. But what is happening? The magnetic field is collapsing. Why is the magnetic field collapsing? It's the 3D support system that's dying. The planet is actually slowing down slowly, and it's wobbling more. The reason for that is it's getting ready to change its support system. And this is something that most geologists know about, but they're not allowed to talk about, because if they do, they get into trouble. The other thing that's been noticed is magnetics at the 19.5 degree mark around the planet, north and south hemisphere, have also been changing. The pole has been moving, North Pole, especially, and the South Pole to a lesser extent, have been moving all over the place. The South Pole, the North Pole, at one time even went as far south as California, and it's going all over the place. It's been moving almost continuously. What has also happened is the tilt of the Earth. The Earth was at 23.5. It's now roughly between 22 and 23 degrees. So what's happening? The planet is wobbling more. Its tilt is changing. It's slowing down every so often. What's happening also? Its impingements, its points of reference are becoming more and more evident every day. So, the crystal point of the core of the Earth is heating up. As it heats up, as the energy heats up, energy in terms of magma is moving upward because it's following the upwelling of these radiant energies from the core of the Earth. So what's happening now, the magma from the core of the Earth, this hot magma, is rising. What's it doing? It's starting to destroy the bottom parts of the lithosphere, which is basically the lithosphere is the bunch of continents and ocean bottoms that extend around and produce what we call the crust. So the crust is getting very active. The amount of activity going on under the oceans is immense. What is happening now is we are beginning to get the transfer of energies from under the ocean into the continental system and the island system of planet Earth. When this happens, what begins to happen is that the planet then moves to the next stage. And this has been happening. You find it now in Italy. They're talking about the apocalypse because of all the earthquakes going on. There's all potential major volcanoes that are near eruption right now, including one in New Zealand that just erupted. So what you now have is a change. There's also a good chance that the western coastal ranges, the Cascades and the Sierras, etc., on the western part of the United States are also on the verge of an eruption period. So what is happening? Our planetary tectonic surfaces are now eroding and getting ready to become more active. The pressure from the beginning of the Earth, the core, up to the surface, to our crust, is now becoming greater and greater. So the planet is now moving. It's kind of almost like a balloon. You're blowing on it, and you have this huge, incredible piece of mud around it on top, and you'll start to crack. And we're on the verge of that right now. So the Federation realizes this is happening, and the angelics have told them that this is very, very close. When it suddenly happens, it's going to happen like that. It's going to be very quick. This is something that most governments on this planet now know. Most governments on this planet don't want to tell their populace for their own selfish reasons, and I'm not going to get into that for any purpose right now. But what we have to do is understand that this is happening. Now, because it's happening, it means that the Federation, which has been in constant observation of ourselves for a long period of time, now knows it's approaching the time for it's, you might say, becoming forth. We also have the rise of the various spiritual hierarchy visions. One of the things that has been told by many people who have been dealing mainly with the spiritual aspect of our planet's change is they are noticing that we are indeed in an end time period. What does the spiritual end mean? It means that we are moving from a reality where our religion is based upon philosophical principles of a division between spirit and matter to a new point where spirit and matter are one. This is the so-called golden age. This is also coming. So we have the spiritual visions happening. So what we now see happening on our planet is a great, incredible spiritual revolution. This spiritual revolution has reared its head in terms of fundamentalism across the world, and its next phase for many above fundamentalism is going beyond the concept of organized religions and looking at who are we. As Christ said many millennia ago, we are all inside of us one with God because we are God. We are godlike. So this whole procedure means that our planet is changing. We are changing spiritually. We are changing also because of the whole effect of what is happening around us. Now, what does this all mean to us? So this is the key point of the whole principle of the message that both the Federation wants me to make and the spiritual hierarchy wants me to make. So this next part may sound a little metaphysical, but what I want people to understand is the nature of what this is all about. The key point to this whole thing is one word, and that's love. Heart energy, as some other people might call it. We are moving from a reality that is based upon the concept of the mind, the head, to ones of the heart. This is the key point. And all I'm going to do is spend some time right now and explain the whole change, what it means to us as a civilization, and why this moment in time is happening. Now, first of all, what has happened is, as I said, in the 1980s, we began changing in terms of our genetics. Most people were not affected immediately by this. It's only in the last few years that a lot of genetic mutations has happened on a mass basis. Mostly this was happening as a kind of a hit or a miss there. Babies would be born with very strange psychic abilities. People would come forth that had been changed dramatically, etc. It was kind of a hit and miss. But by 1995, the genetics had become so prevalent worldwide that a conference was held in Mexico City, and one of the secret documents, etc., that came out of this conference, which is not made public at this time, is basically they have been stating that there is now a massive mutation going on in humanity, and they didn't know whether this was the next AIDS epidemic or whatever, because they, of course, didn't understand it. What we have to understand about it is this is the change to us becoming spiritual beings, to us becoming completely relevant in terms of love energy. It's a time for us to get away from this whole reality of competitiveness to one of cooperation. It's a time of going away from divisiveness toward harmony. This is the basic aspect of our message. Be one with each other. Understand that every person is another part of you, that everything that you mirror out to other people gets mirrored back to you at an even greater level. That the key way to understand and interact with people is in a harmonious way. If you have difficulties, do it in a harmonious way. You know, the ancient Hawaiians here have a culture that was based on this. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I do every morning is called Ho'oponopono, which means to make right right. And in the ancient Hawaiian and traditional Hawaiian culture, this whole procedure was based on a way to allow people to forgive each other, to harmoniously interact with one another, and come together. And this is basically what our civilization is going to be. It's a heart-centered civilization. It's a civilization in which each and every human being understands each other, because you are I, and I are you, to use a little shifting of English around. But what we have to understand here is that this procedure means one basic thing to everybody. And what it means is that we no longer are going to be in a civilization that has a message that you are on your own. If you can't make it, tough. If you can't find a way to grow and become a better person, tough. This is what you created for yourself. You're responsible for it all by yourself, and therefore you have to uncreate it all by yourself. Galactic civilization says, yes, you have a responsibility, you created something, but let us help you together uncreate it. Because creation happens because of a misunderstanding. This misunderstanding, once it is corrected, becomes an understanding. And this understanding is the key knowledge. And both aspects are upon the heart. This is the key to the whole procedure. It's a heart-oriented civilization. That's why spirit and angels in the last 2 years have become so important to us. Because as you move up in consciousness, and this is another thing that the angelics have been doing as part of this whole procedure, they have been moving us more and more and more and more and more into a higher frequency. What does a higher frequency mean? It means two things. First of all, you find it more and more difficult to get angry at other people and keep yourself angry at other people for a long period of time. As you get more and more and more conscious, this becomes even more and more difficult. You get into a cycle that's based upon love, cooperation. You get upon a whole reality that allows you to be the person that you're capable of being. That's the key other point here. You have a purpose. Every person that exists on this civilization is here for a reason. We all have lessons for each other to learn. We all are here also to help each other to understand our purpose. So the purpose of lessons, the purpose of just soul purpose of why we're here, we interact with one another and we create that. So that's what we have to understand. Psychologists are finally, in the last few years, writing books where they're starting to get the message that this is really how civilization is supposed to be. Well, this is something that galactic civilization has had. And in fact, when I was a very young child back in the 50s, they were constantly coming to me as I was really, my sister and I believe very strongly that we were really brought up by extraterrestrials, Syrians to be exact, rather than our parents. That the abusiveness of our parents, etc., was just kind of a front, was kind of like a test for how we were to be. And the procedure that they taught us from the beginning was this whole concept that I'm talking about right now. What they would do is they would give us books, etc., and tell us what was going on. And then after we'd read the books, we would kind of have like a discussion. The purpose of this discussion was to have us understand the nature of galactic civilization. Now, I reached the point when I was a teenager, roughly around 15, 16, where the whole procedure seemed strange to me because I was heavily involved with science. But now that I've been through the science aspect, you might say, I understand the importance of this. And one of the things that I am doing right now, that I'm growing in right now, is understanding this whole concept of love and what it means and how it expands oneself. This is the whole thing that we're talking about right now, the expansion of humanity. Now, they have us expanding. They have us growing forth ever more and more and more and more. And what is it for? Basically, it's for two things. One, as we become more conscious, as our frequency is raised. And what do I mean by frequency? Let me stop for a minute here and explain that. When we become more conscious, it means that around us is a subtle series of bodies, or auric fields, or electromagnetic fields, whatever you want to call them. Some people, like the Russians, have called them the bioplasmic fields, or whatever. You can call them whatever you want. What these fields do is they regulate ourselves. They regulate everything about us. Now, as these fields increase in frequency, it also means that we begin to get open to more and more aspects of reality that we didn't have of before. It's almost as if you went from a person who had never traveled abroad at all to a person who suddenly was traveling abroad continually. As you travel abroad continually, you expand your mind, so to speak. You become more aware of the different ways in which humanity exists. You become more aware of what you want and what you don't want from it. You become knowledgeable. This is basically what raising the frequencies does. It's the same thing. So what happens is we become more and more knowledgeable of who we are. And so what is happening more and more in our society is that we are becoming less and less and less and less satisfied with the way this world operates. Why? Because we now see that our true concept as human beings is entirely different from the stuff that we've been either learned since we were a kid or that we're now miserably in the middle of. And that's the way I like to put it, and that's the way they just put it, so I'll use that word. When we are miserable and more miserable and more miserable, we get more depressed about it. We get more worried about it. This is what is happening to us. So a lot of us are going through a lot of stress. The stress is not so much because of money or because of relationships or etc. The stress is happening because deep inside ourselves we are beginning to see that what we think is right doesn't work. We have to turn the mind off because the mind suddenly doesn't seem to be able to control what we want it to control, namely to give us a reality that sounds good or well or healthy or etc. It seems to be craziness. So the heart becomes the next center of where we center ourselves. We become cognizant of the fact that we are beings of light. What does that mean? That means we are beings of love, beings of care. Human beings are gregarious creatures, means they're sociable. But why are they sociable? Are they sociable to compete with one another? No. We're gregarious to be with one another, and that's an entirely different thing. Being and interacting with one another in pleasurable ways is the basis of what humanity is all about. As a matter of fact, a whole bunch of psychiatrists have started a whole series of movements saying basically that sanity is basically one thing: interacting in a healthy way with each other. What does that mean? That means we don't compete with one another. We learn to be loving and caring and tolerant and learning of each other. This whole concept then becomes what we want to be. But this whole thing is basically based on what we've been talking about. Galactic human societies are societies based upon the concept of love, cooperation, and flow. What do we mean by flow? Let's go into that for a few minutes. Flow simply means one thing. We put no precepts into what we're about to do. We let it happen as it should. Not as we want it to, but as it should, and we learn our lessons from it. This is what we're talking about now. So galactic human society becomes primarily one thing. It becomes a society in which we cooperate with one another. It becomes a society where we learn the meaning of love and how it operates within the context of ourselves. And most importantly, it's one based upon inner growth. So the whole explosion of so-called self-help or inner growth movements in the last 15 years is part and parcel a byproduct of what has been happening to us. So all around us we have this huge, incredible example of what's happening. So our planet is now expanding. But what does that mean? It means one basic point. It means that our civilization now has reached a point where it's no longer viable. Civilization is at an end point. Not only that, scientists who study the environment have realized that our basic planetary society can exist as it is right now, even with minor scientific advancement, for no more than anywhere from 10 to 30 years, 1 to 3 decades. What does this mean for our society? It means that our society is heading toward extinction. What does also that mean? It means that the change in our society to continue to move beyond this point, which seems to be extinction, is one thing: consciousness. So the conscious revolution has been happening. But the conscious revolution suddenly cannot happen and cause us to bridge this present civilization without help. Why? Because as I just said, environmentally, we are no longer a viable society. All around us, planet Earth is dying. But what is dying is not the death of the new Earth, it's the death of the old Earth. Planet Earth is saying to us, this civilization, this Earth, this limited consciousness can no longer happen. You're at the end of this game. This is an end game. So what is happening to our planet? It is basically telling us that you can't do this anymore. We won't let you do this anymore. We will create such massive catastrophes that if you don't change yourselves, it'll destroy you. Because this planet doesn't want to continue as it is now. It doesn't want to have dead oceans, dead atmosphere, dead lakes, virtually desolate and unusable portions of its land surface, etc. It doesn't want that. It doesn't want air that living creatures can't breathe and still operate in a healthy manner at a maximum efficiency. This is not good. It doesn't want it anymore. So what we have now are all the signs, and we can continue on and on and on and on about signs. But what this means to us, most importantly, is it should be taken as a prophetic series of portents that our reality is no longer viable. So then, for those who have read the scientific evidence and can see it, the next basic question becomes, what do we do about it? Now, if we look at all the alternatives, okay, let's look at all the alternatives. What has happened? Our present society is based upon computers. Where did computers come from? Computers came from so-called silicon chips. Silicon chips come from something else that happened basically from a germanium solid-state energy product that was invented back in the 1920s by a guy named Dr. Morey back in Salt Lake City. Now, to go from germanium to silicon is a giant jump. It just didn't happen. It happened because of alien technology. So basically, the mess we're in right now was created by alien technology. So if alien technology of a bad sort created the mess, wouldn't it be logical, even if we just use logic, that this whole thing would end with so-called beneficent alien technology? Now, the only way we can interact anymore with any kind of beneficent aliens with a totally evil government running around us is to do one thing, and that is to hope for divine intervention. This is what is about to happen to us. We have to realize that in a giant evacuation procedure, the government of the United States has procedures set up which are not beneficial for the United States citizen. They're totally detrimental. But I'm not going to go beyond that. My purpose of this program is not to berate people or turn people down or anything like that. The major purpose of what I'm going to be talking about is to have people know there is an alternative. The alternative is the Federation and the Angelics. Both organizations, as well as this planet's basic local spiritual hierarchy, love us a great deal. They love us so much. First, they gave us great avatars like Buddha and Christ to come forth and bring forth all kinds of wondrous messages to allow us to see that there is an alternative. So this became, you might call, the foundation for what they are now about to do. The next stage was we are now in a communicative age. We are now in an age where, in a matter of minutes and seconds from an event occurring, people around most of this planet, and within hours after it happening, most of the people tuned in to worldwide mass media can immediately discover what's happening. So that's the next focus. A series of great messages. And this is the thing that the Federation wants to emphasize. One, you are not alone, dear people. We are here. Second, the Angelics are not about to abandon you because they love you. They helped create what you are today, as well as what you're going to become again. They know that. This was part of a divine plan. This was a part of a great experiment, and that's all I'm going to say about that. What we have to understand is that this is the time when these two great groups are going to give finally some more avatars to us, some great beings, some great Christ-like Masonic beings, as long as the return of the original avatars. These beings together are going to provide us as the basic beginnings of a whole new civilization. That's what we have to understand. This is the beginning of a whole new civilization. We are in the budding period of a great, new, incredible tree of life that is about to spread its wonderful branches across our world. As we understand that, we become more and more capable of being one with it. What does this mean to us? It means to us that this great conscious revolution, which we just talked about, has been grown among us for one purpose, to prepare us for this incredible, fully conscious age. That's what is about to happen. Our planet is about to change. Change in consciousness, change in the nature of the people on this planet, change in the society. And we are also about to become members of a whole galactic, incredible civilization, of which the Galactic Federation might be looked upon as the sounding board for all that happens. Because every civilization has within it its own sovereignty, but it understands that this sovereignty is based upon one thing: the local spiritual hierarchies and the divine plan. This is a whole different orientation. Government no longer looks upon itself as being omnipotent at any point. It is beholden not only to the angelics, it is beholden also to the physical angels ourselves. And there will be incredible ways that I'm not going to get into right now. I've kind of been saying this left and right because I want to do another tape later and talk about this stuff that I've been kind of going around, because if I was to explain the whole thing, I'd be here for a long, long time, and I don't want to do that right now. So what we have to understand is that this entire civilization is moving towards this point. What is this point? This point is when the planetary shifting its surface, the change in our consciousness, and the bringing down of both our other physical angels, our space brothers and sisters, and the spiritual angels together brings in a whole new reality. We combine spiritual with physical. We become incredible beings. Beings that can see spirit in all levels, whether it's the dear departed ones, angelics, etc. We become people who are totally and completely one and fully integrated with spirit and with physicality. We do not let go of physicality. Physicality is here for a purpose. Creation has a reason for it existing. Therefore, we have to continually look at this and understand that physical aspects of our reality are aspects that are key, are an important part of our reality. If we were to look at ourselves as being in a reincarnation cycle, which many religions and philosophies on this planet talk about, the key to that is spirituality and also physicality. We learn lessons here that are then transduced into the spirit and then help us to grow. And as we grow, we become greater physical beings. And this is the key to the whole procedure. This is something we have to fully understand. It's something that we will learn. What the Federation is coming for is not to suddenly act as this giant occupation force or anything. They're here for just one thing, as I said, to help get us through the next point. Because we're about to get, so to speak, our angel wings back. We are about to become fully conscious beings. Now, we are basically like two-year-olds or 5-year-olds right now that suddenly are going to become adults. You can't do that. It's almost like the movie Big becoming reality. You can't do that in a fully conscious society without immense parental, loving care and education, and that's basically what the Federation is here for. The Federation is not here because of the whole procedure of why we have to change. They're here to help us change. Now, in the final few minutes, let me try to summarize some of the things that we've been talking about so that we can completely understand at a better level what's happening. First of all, we talked about the Earth changes. We talked about the nature that our planet is changing and changing dramatically. Up to now, it's been slow. As it gets slower right now, it's because it's actually getting ready to get faster, which may sound contradictory, but it isn't. Basically, our planet is on the verge of a massive shift. This will happen dramatically now. It's very close, and we have to understand that. Two, there's the Galactic Federation itself. They are here, as I've reiterated time and time again, they are here for the purpose of, one, having us know we're not alone, and two, helping us through this. They are here to basically midwife us through this tremendous rebirthing of our civilization, and most importantly, of ourselves. And then the third thing we would most importantly have to understand is the whole nature of why this change is happening. This change is happening because our basic civilization, and most importantly our planet, have reached a point where it's either change now or extinction. And we have to realize that our planet, which I also want to talk about more later, is a living being. Being a living being, as with all of us, it doesn't want to die. It wants to transfigure itself. It wants to bring forth a whole new reality. And this is what it intends to do. So as it moves forward, what we have to learn and what we have to understand is that we are in this transitionary period. So that's the next point in the summary that I'd like people to understand. We are in a transitory period. The transitory limit, in other words, will not last that long. We are not in a very long transiting period. But what we have to understand and realize, and this is really the key to this whole thing, is that we have to learn to be patient about it, not to be too critical, not to be too worried about change. Everything will unfold in its own unique and wondrous way. And as you bring yourself through this system, one element after another of your own internal growth, you'll see that. Part of the whole test that has been happening out here on planet Earth is that this has been a giant test ground. And the big, incredible word that they would like to get us to understand is patience. This is something that most humans, and I can say that I'm not exactly out of this loop either, have to learn how to be patient. And this is something that all of us as beings will have to learn how to do more and more better. As this happens, we just have to learn that this is part of a great reality. So just remember that as you look at all the things that are happening. Remember patience. Patience is really the great virtue here. The other great virtue is cooperation. Learn to bring the message of what is happening to each other. Learn to look at it, but look at it through a critical eye based not on what your physical head says, but what your heart says. Be in your heart on these things. This is a situation where we have to learn how to be heart-centered. That's the other great test. Patience and love, and the logic of love. As we learn this more and more, we become able to understand exactly what it is that we are doing. So this is one of the things that we have to really thoroughly understand. So one of the things as I conclude this little mini lecture here is I want people to understand to have patience, to be cooperative with one another, and be loving, because that's a part of being cooperative with one another. Learn to get together and think about this stuff and talk about it and be open about it, and don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid to discuss this stuff. So just remember that more and more and more and more and more. I'm going to use that again because probably people said I was overusing it, but I think it's important that we emphasize these points. So as I leave here today, what I want you to understand is this important point about patience, this important, incredible need to be loving to each other, and most of all, to understand one another. Try to understand what makes each other act the way we do with each other. It's kind of a hit-and-miss operation, I realize, but it's part of the whole procedure of allowing us to be able to understand who and what we are. And if we'll do that more and more, then we'll be who we are. And to use a phrase that is very important, that I usually use at the end of my my updates on my website, which you've probably been seeing going across the screen, etc. What I like to use is an old Syrian expression, a greeting which is used also, and very importantly, as the beginning as well as the end of saying hello or goodbye to one another, is a little phrase called Salamat Jah, which simply means be in joy. To galactic humans, joy is a natural state. That's why you always will hear people say, why does the Buddha always look like he's laughing? That's really the key. So I would just like to leave right now saying, Salamat Jah, be in joy.